So my story is titled tonight is called Nasrudin Hoja, another taste. Another taste it's called. So I've told Nasrudin Hoja stories several times. I think twice before here. I've told them everywhere, including my house parties a couple times. But so Nasrudin Hoja was a story character who appeared in around the 13th century in the southern Turkish area. And these stories grew and spread, and eventually they'd gone through the entire Islamic world, the Middle East, and had got as far as China. And some of these stories have shown up in other cultures too. But I find that I love them. But so he's this guy, and well, they're also different. But sometimes he's like witty, and sometimes he's pretty smart, and sometimes he's not so smart. So I've got a few of them I'm going to share with you tonight. Hopefully you haven't heard them all before, but it doesn't matter. So the first one is called The Perfect Wife. Now, Nasrudin remained a bachelor a lot longer than the other men. Significant number of years longer. And some of his friends asked him one day, Nasrudin, why don't you get married? And he said, well, I like to have all the things in my life the best they can be. And that means for a life partner that they need to be beautiful, intelligent, and can cook. He says, I've looked far and near. I've been to other countries. I'm still looking. Well, they said, oh, come on, you can't look that hard. He says, I heard of a woman in the north, and I went to her. She was beautiful and such intelligence. But her cooking, horrible. I heard of another woman to the east, and I went. And she was beautiful. And she saw that I was hungry. She cooked this wonderful meal. And then we started to have a discussion. No wisdom there. Just nonsense coming out of her mouth. Another woman I heard of from the south. And I went to see her. And I arrived late in the evening. And she could tell that I was hungry. So she made a meal and we ate it together in the dark. And then we started discussing things. And the wisdom that came from her mouth. And eventually she lit a lamp so that we could see a little better. Oh, beautiful she was not. And then he talked about a woman from the west. Yes, he said, I went. She was as beautiful as a rose. She had a heart like an angel, sang like a nightingale. Her family was rich and reputable. She'd been educated and was so smart. And she cooked. She was my dream girl. They said, Nasrudin, why didn't you marry? He says, there was a small problem. She was looking for the perfect husband. Here's another one. Totally different thing. So Nasrudin, he lived in the hills of southern Turkey, and occasionally he would be selling vegetables in the market or cutting wood in the forest. But most of the time he spent working in his fields and his vineyards. And it was on one of those days when he'd been in the fields all day. He came home just very late and came into the house, and his wife said to him, you're late for the feast. He says, I know I'm late. I'll just get washed up and dust off my clothes and go over. She says, well, your finest coat and your turban are laid out for you. No, he says, I have no time for that. So he washed up and dusted off as best he would and went over to the feast. The host of the feast was named Hassan. And so he walked through the door, and he could see he was very, very late. Everybody was already gathered around the tables, and the food was being passed, and he could see Hassan over there, and he just kind of nodded to Nasrudin. He didn't say anything. So he found a place to sit and sat down, and he was able to get a little bit of rice from a platter that was going by, and he managed to snag a little piece of chicken off another platter that was just sitting there. And he turned to the man on his right and said, "I heard such a wonderful story in the market yesterday." And the guy completely ignored him. He was talking to somebody else. And Nasrudin turned to the other side and said, "Did I tell you about the donkey I was going to buy?" And again, this guy ignored him. He looked around, and these were his friends, and nobody even acknowledged that he was there. So he decided he was going to let it go. So he got up and left, and nobody said a word. And he went back home, and his wife said, "Oh, that was a short feast." He says, "Oh, I'm going back. I'm just going to change into that fine coat and turban." So he did, and he went back. And as soon as he walked through the door, Hassan stood up and said, "Oh, Nasrudin, at last you're here. Don't worry, I will get you some food. Take a seat." So he did, and Hassan got him some food, and Nasrudin sat down, and the man on his right said, "Oh, are you going to tell us some stories tonight?" And then the man on the left said, "Oh, I had some questions to ask you about my peach tree." And he started eating, and he was having a great time, and then he started telling a story. And he told the story, a little bit about this story, and then he stopped. And he took some chicken and some rice, and he put them in his pocket and said, "Eat, goat, eat." People kind of looked at him. And then he went back to telling a story. And then he went and he was eating some stuffed grape leaves. And he took a couple and into his pocket again. "Eat, goat, eat." Well, Nasrudin has a reputation for being a little bit wacky sometimes. So this wasn't totally unexpected. The behavior was way off from what he'd normally do. But nobody said anything. And he went on back to his story, then he stopped again. And he started pouring some mint tea into his pocket. And with that, Hassan jumped up and said, "Nasrudin, what are you doing?" He says, "Well, it should be obvious. I came here in my work clothes. Everybody ignored me. I couldn't barely find a crumb to eat. So I went home and changed into my fine clothes. And since then, everybody is my friend, my best friend. And so it's obvious to me. It wasn't me you invited to the feast. It was my coat." And that's what it was.